This is the owner's suite. There are perfectly good seats in the back. Much more your speed.
Move now, or security will physically remove you from this aircraft.
Put the bag down. I'm not moving.
Move now, or security... Don't you ever put your hands on me! I'm telling security you assaulted me!
Everything you said, everything you did is recorded.
Confirmed. Elias Marsh is the sole client and registered owner of the aircraft.
Mr. Marsh, I sincerely apologize. What would you like?
He never attacked her. She slapped him and invented the entire story. Little traitor, he'll never work on life.
Stop talking, right now.
Keep watching the story and follow Mr. Marcus Stories for more powerful moments.
Get your hands off that seat and get to the back of this plane where you belong. The woman's voice cracked through the cabin like a whip, her finger jabbing toward the rear of the aircraft, her lips pulled tight over her teeth. He didn't move, he didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her the way a man looks at weather. He's already decided to wait out. She leaned in closer, closer than professional distance ever allows, and told him he looked like he'd wandered off a Greyhound bus and onto somebody else's airplane. Still nothing, just steady eyes and a slow, even breath. That silence did something to her. It made her madder than any word could have. She reached back and slapped him across the face so hard, the sound cracked off the mahogany paneling like a gunshot. He touched his cheek once, calm as still water, and said 4 words that would end her career before the plane even left the ground. You just made a mistake. 10 minutes later, she was on her knees, begging a man she'd humiliated to please not press charges. Have you ever watched somebody destroy their entire life in the time it takes to microwave a cup of coffee? That's exactly what you're about to see. But let's back up, because you need to understand exactly how we got to that slap, that phone in his pocket already recording, and the 4 words that followed it. It was 6:52 in the morning at Scottsdale Air Park, Arizona, and the sky still had that bruised orange color. It gets right before the sun fully commits to the day. The air smelled like jet fuel and desert dust, that dry Arizona cold that bites at your knuckles before 8 a.m. and then forgets it ever existed by noon. Ground crew moved between the aircraft in reflective vests, breath fogging in front of their faces, headsets crackling with clearance chatter. At the edge of the private terminal, a black SUV rolled to a stop, and a man stepped out alone. No driver holding a placard with his name on it, no assistant trailing behind with a garment bag, just him, a canvas duffel slung over one shoulder, a tablet tucked under his arm, and a black hoodie that had seen better years. His name was Elias Marsh. If you looked him up, you wouldn't find much. No verified checkmark, no magazine spreads, no red carpet photos with his arm around anybody. Elias Marsh was the kind of billionaire most people had never heard of, and that was exactly how he liked it. He was 52 years old, raised in West Baltimore by a mother who worked double shifts folding hospital linens for $11 an hour. A scholarship got him to Morehouse College. Everything after that he built with his own 2 hands. 26 years, and Marsh Rising Group had grown from a single rented office with a fax machine into a $4.3 billion operation spanning freight logistics, aerospace components, and commercial real estate in 14 states. But here's the thing about Elias. He never dressed like what he was. No watch worth more than a car, no tailored anything, no cufflinks catching the light. This morning, it was a plain black hoodie, jeans gone soft at the knees, and a pair of running shoes he'd owned since a trip to Phoenix 3 winters back. Noise-canceling headphones hung loose around his neck. This wasn't an accident. Elias had learned a long time ago that the way people treat you before they know what you're worth tells you everything about who they actually are underneath the good manners. He walked through the terminal with a small nod to the woman behind the desk, and she waved him through without blinking because she checked him in a dozen times before and knew exactly whose name was on that manifest. Outside on the tarmac, his aircraft waited, a Gulfstream G650 with the tail number November, Mike Hotel Golf, $68 million of engineering sitting quiet under the desert sky. The jet belonged to Marsh Horizon Group. Elias was the sole owner. He chartered the crew and flight management through a company called Sterling Aviation Partners, which handled the scheduling, the maintenance, and the staffing for a small fleet of similar aircraft up and down the coast. He climbed the air stairs, and that familiar smell hit him. The second the door opened, leather conditioner, warm mahogany, a faint trace of cedar from the little diffuser tucked near the galley. 4 oversized seats filled the main cabin, a conference table with 2 embedded screens, and a private suite in the back behind a frosted glass partition. Elias took his usual seat, second row, window side, set his duffel down beside him, and pulled out his tablet to review the paperwork for a $340 million acquisition he was closing that afternoon in Austin, Texas, a regional freight carrier called Redline Transport that had been bleeding money under bad ownership for 6 years straight. Just another Tuesday for a man who built empires without ever raising his voice. Now let me introduce you to the other person in this story. Deborah Voss, 44 years old, senior flight attendant with Sterling Aviation Partners for 12 years. Blonde hair pulled back into a bun, so tight it looked like it hurt, uniform pressed to a crease sharp enough to cut paper, and a smile that could freeze a glass of water at 10 paces. Among the crews she worked with, Deborah had a reputation. The nice version of it was particular. The honest versions, whispered in break rooms and crew vans where nobody thought it would ever leave the building, was something a lot uglier. More than one coworker had noticed the pattern over the years: cooler greetings, shorter patience, longer stares, all of it depending on who was sitting in the seat. 3 formal complaints had been filed against her. All 3 came from Black or Latino passengers. All 3 were reviewed by the same regional manager. All 3 were closed with the same 4 words typed into the file: insufficient evidence found. This particular morning, Deborah wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. Her scheduled route had gotten scrapped over a mechanical delay, and she'd been reassigned to the Scottsdale charter with about 40 minutes notice. She showed up, rushed, skipped her manifest review entirely, and walked straight into the cabin where she found a black man in a hoodie sitting in the owner's suite, the most expensive seat on the aircraft. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't check the app. She didn't so much as glance at the tablet in his lap. She simply decided in about a second and a half that he didn't belong there, and that decision was about to cost her every single thing she had. Deborah didn't walk toward Elias so much as march, her heels cracking against the cabin floor like a countdown clock. She stopped directly in front of him, arms crossed, and looked down at him the way you look at a stain, someone tracked in on an expensive rug. "Can I see your boarding confirmation?" she said, and there wasn't a shred of professional warmth in it. It was the tone people use when they've already convicted you before you've said a single word in your own defense. Elias looked up from his tablet without a flicker of irritation, opened the Sterling app on his phone, and turned the screen toward her.
His name.
The flight number, the tail number, today's date, everything right there in plain black text. She barely looked at it. She tilted her head and let out a small, dry laugh through her nose. "This just shows a booking," she said. "It doesn't prove you're supposed to be sitting in this section." She put a little extra weight on the words "this section," like they were something precious he tracked mud onto. Elias set his phone down on the armrest, and when he spoke, his voice was level, unhurried, the kind of calm you only get from 20 years of people underestimating you and being wrong every single time. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. Her jaw tightened. She uncrossed her arms and planted both hands on her hips. "Look, I don't know what happened at the front desk, but this is the owner's suite. It's reserved. Maybe there was a mix-up about which aircraft you were supposed to board. It happens." Then, with a smile that had absolutely no warmth behind it, "There are perfectly good seats in the back. Much more your speed. Elias didn't answer. He held her gaze for a long, still moment, put his headphones back on, and went back to his tablet. Lightly. That silence, the sheer refusal to engage with her, did something to Deborah Voss. You could see it in the way her nostrils flared, the way her fingers curled at her sides. Lightly. She wasn't used to being ignored, and she certainly wasn't used to being ignored by someone she'd already decided didn't matter. Lightly. She turned, grabbed his duffel bag off the seat beside him with both hands, and started walking it down the aisle like it was garbage somebody forgot to throw out. Lightly. Let's get you relocated, she said over her shoulder. You'll be much more comfortable back there. Elias stood up. When he rose out of that seat, the cabin seemed to shrink around him, 6'2", shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, and even in a worn hoodie, his presence took up the whole room. Lightly. He didn't shout, he didn't lunge. He just said, clear and firm, the kind of firm that doesn't need volume behind it, put the bag down. Lightly. I'm not moving. Deborah froze mid-step. She turned around slowly, still holding the bag, and for half a second something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe even a flash of something close to fear. Lightly. Her pride swallowed it fast. She let the bag drop, not gently, and it hit the cabin floor with a thud that echoed off the leather seats. Lightly. She leaned in, lowered her voice just enough to sound like a threat, and said, you really don't want to make this difficult for yourself. Lightly. Then, loud enough for anyone within 10 feet to hear, she muttered, this is exactly what happens when people don't read the rules. Lightly. From the galley doorway, a pair of wide eyes watched every second of it. Natalie Sharp, 26, junior flight attendant, 6 months into the job, frozen with a tray of glasses in her hands, barely breathing. Lightly. She'd seen Deborah be sharp with passengers before. She'd heard the stories whispered in the crew van. But this was something else entirely, and her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something before the words got stuck somewhere behind her teeth. Lightly. Deborah had seniority, Deborah connections. Deborah had gotten a junior attendant transferred to a regional cargo route out in Nebraska last year for the crime of politely disagreeing with her during a briefing. Lightly. So Natalie stayed quiet, for now. Back in his seat, Elias put his headphones on again, tablet back in his lap, face unreadable, the kind of stillness that could mean patience or could mean a storm quietly building behind a closed door. Lightly. Deborah wasn't finished. She came back a second time, face flushed red now, and planted herself directly in front of him. Lightly. I'm going to say this one more time, she said, loud enough that Captain Richard Holloway might have heard it from the cockpit if the reinforced door hadn't already been sealed for pre-flight checks. Lightly. You either show me a valid ID proving you belong in this section, or I am calling ground security and having you physically removed from this aircraft. Lightly. Your choice. Elias took his headphones off slowly, folded them, and set them on the armrest. I'd like to speak with your captain, he said. Lightly. Deborah's eyes went wide with something close to theater. You don't get to make demands on my aircraft, she snapped. Lightly. You're a passenger. I'm the crew. I decide to sit where, and I'm telling you, you do not belong here. Lightly. She pointed toward the back of the plane. Now move, or I make the call. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes steady, his breathing slow, and when he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to lean in to catch it. Lightly. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Do what you need to do. Something in Deborah snapped right then. Maybe it was the calm. Lightly. Maybe it was the fact that he wouldn't bend no matter how hard she pushed. Maybe it was the simple, unbearable reality that a man in a hoodie was sitting in the most expensive seat on the plane and refusing to submit to her. Lightly. She reached for the headphones on the armrest, fast, grabbing at them the way you snatch a toy from a kid, throwing a tantrum. Lightly. Elias pulled his hand back instinctively, a reflex, nothing more, his fingers brushing her forearm as he moved. Deborah recoiled like she'd been burned. Lightly. She stumbled back a full step, eyes huge, mouth falling open in exaggerated shock, and then she swung, open palm, full force, straight across Elias Marsh's face. Lightly. The sound cracked through the cabin like a firecracker going off inside a library. It bounced off the mahogany paneling. Lightly. It hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke that wouldn't clear. In the galley, Natalie dropped the glass she was holding, and it shattered against the floor, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Lightly. Elias's head turned from the force of it. A red mark bloomed instantly across his left cheek. He sat there completely still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 5 seconds. Lightly. Deborah was breathing hard now, chest heaving, hands still raised in the air, like she wasn't sure whether to hit him again or defend herself from something that hadn't happened yet. Lightly. She pointed a shaking finger at his face. "Don't you ever put your hands on me," she said, voice trembling with something that wasn't fear, it was fury. Lightly. "I saw what you did. You grabbed me. I have every right to defend myself." She smoothed her uniform, fixed her hair, and her voice shifted, suddenly controlled, suddenly rehearsed, like a switch had flipped somewhere behind her eyes. Lightly. "I'm calling security. You're getting off this plane, and when they get here, I'm telling them exactly what you did to me." Lightly. Elias didn't say anything. Not yet. He raised his hand, slow and deliberate, not toward her, toward the pocket of his hoodie. Lightly. 2 fingers, calm as anything, and Deborah took an involuntary step back, just watching him move. He pulled out his phone. Lightly. The screen was already lit. A red timer sat in the corner, counting upward. 14 minutes and 31 seconds. Lightly. He'd been recording since the moment she first walked toward his seat. He set the phone face up on the armrest, the microphone icon pulsing gently. Lightly. "Everything you've said," he told her, voice barely above the hum of the engines. "Everything you've done, the bag, the slap. Lightly. The threat you're about to make to security. It's all right here." He tapped the screen once, audio and video. Lightly. Something shifted across Deborah's face. The rage was still there, but underneath it, something colder crept, and something she hadn't felt yet that morning. Lightly doubt. Elias leaned back, folded his hands, and said, just as quiet as before, "Now I'd still like to speak with your captain." Lightly. Most people, once they realize the camera's been rolling the whole time, stop. They backpedal. They remember all of a sudden how to speak to another human being with respect. Lightly. Deborah Voss was not most people. She stared at that phone on the armrest for 3 long seconds, the timer ticking past 1440, 1441, 1442. Lightly. Then she smiled, not a nervous smile, a cold, hard one, the kind that says I've survived worse than this, and I've always come out on top. Lightly. She lifted her chin. "Record all you want," she said. "When security gets here, we'll see who they believe. 12 years of seniority or some random guy in a hoodie who forced his way into first class." Lightly. She let that word random hang in the air, like it was doing her a favor. She turned her back, walked to the intercom panel near the galley, and pressed the call button for ground operations. Lightly. Her voice changed instantly, softer, higher. A slight tremble worked into it, like she'd rehearsed this exact performance in front of a mirror. Lightly. "Ground ops, this is Senior Attendant Voss on the Mars Charter. I need security at the aircraft immediately. Unruly passenger in the owner's suite, refusing crew instruction." Lightly. She paused and added quieter, like she was confiding something painful. "He became physically aggressive. He grabbed my arm. I feel unsafe." Lightly. "Please hurry." She released a button, took a breath, and when she turned back around, her face had reset, completely calm, wounded, professional. Lightly. It was a small masterclass in manipulation, and from the galley, Natalie Sharp watched every second of it happen. Her hands were shaking now, not from the cold. Lightly. She had seen the whole thing, every second of it, from the moment Deborah skipped, checking the manifest, to the moment her palm connected with a man's face who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Lightly. There was no grab, there had been no assault. The only person in that cabin who put a hand on anyone was standing at the intercom right now, rearranging her story in real time. Lightly. 2 minutes later, footsteps hit the air stairs. 2 ground security officers boarded, both broad-shouldered, both in dark uniforms. Lightly. One was older, gray at the temples, the kind of calm you only get after 20-some years of not jumping to conclusions before you've seen the facts. Lightly. The other was younger, tense, one hand resting near his radio like he expected trouble the second he stepped through the door. Deborah intercepted them before they'd taken 2 steps into the cabin, talking fast, hands gesturing, voice carrying that same fragile tremble from the intercom call. Thank God you're here. He forced his way into the owner's suite. I asked him to move more than once. He refused. Then he grabbed my arm and I had to defend myself. She pointed toward Elias without looking at him. I want him off this plane. The older officer, name tag reading Callahan, nodded slowly and walked past her down the aisle toward Elias, who was still seated, tablet in his lap, phone still recording on the armrest beside him. Sir, I'm Officer Callahan with Airpark Security. Can I see some identification, please? Elias reached into his back pocket, no sudden movement, and handed over his driver's license without a word. Callahan looked at the photo, looked at Elias, looked at the name printed under it, Marsh Elias D. His expression didn't move much, but something behind his eyes shifted a half-second pause, longer than it should have taken to read 6 letters. He handed the license back, stepped 3 feet away, turned his back to the cabin, and keyed his radio low. Ground Ops, this is Callahan. I need client verification on tail number. November Mike Hotel Golf. Confirm the owner-client registered for today's charter. Silence. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Then the radio crackled back. Confirmed. Tail number is registered to Marsh Horizon Group. Today's sole charter client on file is Elias Marsh, founders and CEO of the registering company. He is the principal on the manifest. Callahan lowered the radio slowly. He stood still for a second, and then he turned not toward Elias, toward Deborah, and the look on his face sat somewhere between disbelief and barely contained anger. He walked past her without a word and came back to Elias, his whole tone different now, almost apologetic. Mr. Marsh, I sincerely apologize for the disruption. Is there anything you need from us right now? Elias looked up at him, a long, level look, then said 3 words, quiet as a whisper, heavy as a dropped anchor. Get her off. Every head in that cabin heard it. The younger officer's hand had already dropped away from his radio, mouth slightly open, staring at Deborah like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. And Deborah stood by the galley entrance with her arms frozen at her sides. The color drained so completely out of her face, she looked carved from wax. Her lips moved, but nothing came out at first. Wait, she finally managed. What? No, that he can't be. Look at him. There's no way she never finished that sentence. She didn't have to. Everyone in that cabin heard exactly what she swallowed before it could leave her mouth. The cabin went quiet in that heavy way that presses against your chest. Then Natalie Sharp stepped forward, out of the galley, hands still trembling, voice barely above a whisper when she started, but growing steadier with every word. Officers, I need to tell you what actually happened. Deborah's head snapped toward her, eyes wide, panic showing through the fury for the first time. Natalie don't, but Natalie kept going. She looked straight at Officer Callahan and laid it out clean. Mr. Marsh was seated when Miss Voss approached him. He showed her his booking confirmation. She dismissed it. She took his bag without permission and tried to move it herself. When he stood and asked her to stop, she dropped the bag on the floor. She came back a second time and demanded he leave. He asked to speak to the captain. She reached for his personal belongings and he pulled his hand back. That's it. He pulled back. He never touched her first. She slapped him across the face, full force, and then told him she was going to report him for assault. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the ventilation cycling through the ducts. Deborah took a step toward Natalie, voice dropping to a hiss, low and venomous. You little traitor. 6 months on the job and you think you know how any of this works. When this is over, I promise you'll never work another flight as long as that's enough. Officer Callahan cut in, voice like a steel door slamming shut. Ms. Voss, stop talking right now. At that exact moment, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Richard Holloway stepped out, headset still hanging around his neck, face tight. He'd been monitoring the security channel for the last 2 minutes. Quietly, he looked at Callahan, then Deborah, then Elias, and it took him about 30 seconds to be fully briefed on what had happened. Quietly, in those 30 seconds, his expression went from professional neutrality to something close to cold fury. He turned to Deborah. Quietly, Ms. Voss, you are relieved of duty on this flight, effective immediately. Collect your things. You have 60 seconds to deplane. Quietly, Captain, if you just let me explain, that was not a request, Holloway said. 60 seconds. Starting now. Deborah stood there for maybe 5 of those seconds, eyes darting from Callahan to the younger officer, to Natalie, and finally to Elias. Quietly, he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was already back on his tablet, already past her. She grabbed her bag from the galley, movements jerky and frantic, the polished composure she'd worn like armor all morning crumbling in front of everyone. Lightly, she walked toward the cabin door, heels clicking unevenly now, no longer a confident march, more of a retreat. At the top of the air stairs, she turned back, mouth opening like she might shout something, but the cabin door was already swinging shut. Lightly, the last thing she saw was the back of Elias Marsh's head, calm and unmoved. The air stairs retracted, the door sealed. Lightly, and Deborah Voss stood alone on the tarmac in the early morning cold, watching a jet she would never set foot on again lift off without her. Lightly, the jet climbed out at 7:24, smooth and quiet, engines humming as it broke through a thin layer of desert haze into open blue sky. Lightly, inside everything went still. Natalie brought Elias a cup of coffee, hands still shaking slightly. Mr. Marsh, I'm so sorry about all of this. Lightly, he looked up, and for the first time that morning, something in his face softened. He took the coffee. Thank you, Natalie, he said. Lightly, what you did back there took real courage. Her eyes went glassy, and she nodded once before slipping back to the galley, before the tears fell. Lightly, Elias set the coffee down and picked up his personal phone, tapping one contact. David Kessler, his attorney of 14 years, picked up on the second ring. Lightly, Elias, it's early. What happened? His voice was flat and even. No heat in it yet, just cold precision. The voice of a man laying out a plan before a fight he already knows he'll win. Lightly, Elias told him everything, the words, the bag on the floor, the slap, the fabricated radio call, and the recording. Lightly, Kessler was quiet for a long moment. I've watched you walk away from situations like this more times than I can count, he finally said. Lightly, you always let it go. Don't let this one go. I wasn't planning to, Elias answered. Kessler moved fast. Within 30 minutes, while Elias was still 11,000 feet over the desert, there was a 4-step plan sitting on his desk. Lightly, first, file a formal assault complaint with Air Park authorities, full recording attached as evidence. Second, send the recording to Sterling Aviation Partners' legal department along with a demand letter requiring a written response inside 48 hours. Lightly. Third, demand a full internal investigation into Deborah Voss's employment history, every complaint, every closed file, every pattern anyone had ever noticed and looked away from. Lightly. Fourth, formally notify Sterling that Marsh Horizon Group was reviewing its entire $15 million a year charter management contract, Sterling's single largest client relationship. Lightly. Elias approved every word of it. Kessler told him the letters would be sent before his wheels touched down in Austin. Lightly. The next call was to his wife, Renee Marsh, co-founder of a boutique design firm, elegant enough to fill a room and sharp enough to empty one just as fast. Lightly. When Elias finished telling her what happened, the line went quiet for 6 full seconds. Then Renee spoke, her voice like ice wrapped in silk. Lightly, she hit you on your own plane, then lied about it. Yes, Elias said, I love you, and I respect how much you value your privacy, but this cannot stay quiet. Lightly. Elias hesitated. His anonymity had always been a tool. It let him see people exactly as they were when they thought no one important was watching. Lightly, Renee cut straight through that wall. How many people has she done this to who didn't have a recording, she asked. Lightly. Who didn't own the plane, have the ability to make sure this doesn't happen again, use it. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and said, Call Sandra Cole. Lightly. Sandra Cole was an investigative journalist who spent a decade covering corporate bias cases that didn't just go viral, they changed company policy. Lightly. Within the hour, Kessler had sent her the recording along with Elias's written consent, and the dominoes started falling. Meanwhile, on the ground, Nathaniel Briggs, CEO of Sterling Aviation Partners, was about to have the morning of his professional life. Lightly. 22 years building a reputation for discretion and luxury, and he was sitting in his office when Kessler's letter hit his inbox. Lightly. He opened the attachment, pressed play. 12 minutes and 48 seconds later, he was staring at his screen with both palms flat on the desk, face gray, coffee cold in front of him. Lightly. He'd watched a woman slap a client across the face, heard her tell him to get to the back of the plane where he belonged, heard the fabricated distress call, every ugly second of it undeniable. Lightly. He called Elias directly. Elias didn't pick up. Kessler answered instead, polite, professional, and devastating. Mr. Marsh will not be taking calls from Sterling until we receive a formal written response. Lightly. You have 48 hours. The line went dead, and Nathaniel Briggs sat there for a long moment with absolutely no idea what to do next. Lightly. 24 hours. That's all it took for Deborah Voss's entire world to collapse. Sterling's legal team reviewed the recording 3 separate times, 3 different attorneys, 3 identical conclusions: clear misconduct, assault, and falsification of a security report. Lightly. There was no gray area to argue. By noon the following day, Deborah was terminated, not suspended, not reassigned. Terminated effective immediately, 12 years of seniority gone in a single phone call. Lightly. But the recording didn't just end her career. It cracked open something a lot uglier underneath it. When Sterling's HR department pulled her full employee file, the unfiltered version most managers never see, the legal team went quiet reading it. Lightly. 3 prior complaints, every one of them from a pastor of color. The first, filed 18 months earlier, from a black businessman who said Deborah refused to use his name and instead called him Sir in a tone he described as dripping with contempt. Lightly. Closed, no action. The second, filed 11 months earlier, from a Latino family who said Deborah told them they were in the wrong section and physically blocked them from seats they had already paid for. Lightly. Closed, no action. The third, filed just 5 months before this flight, from a young black woman traveling alone who said Deborah made her show her boarding pass 4 separate times over a 2-hour flight, and when asked why, allegedly replied, "Because I need to make sure you're actually supposed to be here." Lightly. Closed, no action. All 3 complaints had been investigated and dismissed by the same regional manager, a man named Gerald Finch, who signed off on every closure with the exact same boilerplate line: insufficient evidence to substantiate the claim, no further action required. Lightly. Gerald Finch was placed on administrative leave. The same afternoon Deborah was fired. He never came back to his desk. Lightly. Deborah didn't go quietly. She hired an attorney within hours and filed a wrongful termination claim, arguing that Elias had provoked her, that she felt threatened, that the slap was self-defense. Lightly. Her attorney released a statement calling the termination premature and retaliatory. Nobody believed a word of it. The recording existed. Lightly. The recording didn't lie. Nathaniel Briggs had a bigger problem than the firing. Lightly. Through Kessler, Elias had rejected Sterling's first settlement offer before the ink had even dried: a formal apology, lifetime complimentary charter service, and a $500,000 payment for emotional distress, delivered with a handwritten note from Briggs himself. Lightly. Kessler's response came back in 3 sentences. Mr. Marsh has no interest in Sterling's money. He is not for sale, and neither is his dignity. Lightly. Instead, Elias made 3 demands. First, a public acknowledgement from Sterling that systemic failures in their complaint process had allowed a pattern of racial bias to continue unchecked for years. Lightly. Second, a full third-party audit of Sterling's HR and complaint procedures conducted by an independent civil rights organization with 0 financial ties to the company. Lightly. Third, mandatory bias training for every single employee, flight crews, ground staff, executives, everyone designed and delivered by that same independent organization and funded entirely by Sterling. Nathaniel Briggs agreed to all three within 48 hours. He didn't negotiate a single clause. He couldn't afford to, because the fourth blow was already falling. Despite every concession, Elias followed through on his warning anyway. Marsh Horizon Group formally terminated its $15 million a year charter contract with Sterling Aviation Partners. Kessler's termination letter ran exactly one page. The final line read, Marsh Horizon Group does not maintain business relationships with organizations that tolerate discrimination against its own clients. Elias moved his entire fleet management to a competing charter company with a documented, independently verified record on equity and compliance. The transition took less than a week. When the news hit industry channels, the reaction was immediate. Sterling's parent company saw its stock drop 9% in a single trading day. The aviation trade publications ran the story on their front pages. And Deborah Voss, sitting alone in her apartment, refreshing her phone every 30 seconds, watched the company she'd worked at for 12 years start cracking at the foundation because of one assumption, one slap, and one lie, and she still had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Sandra Cole published her story on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern. The headline hit like a freight train. Billionaire slapped on his own jet. Inside the incident that exposed a culture of bias at a luxury charter company. The piece was thorough and verified 4 separate ways: the recording, the flight manifest, the security logs, the pattern of prior complaints. Sandra interviewed Natalie Sharp on the record. She obtained Sterling's internal HR documents through a source inside the company. She reached out to Deborah for comment. Deborah declined. The article included key portions of the recording, released with Elias's full written consent, not the entire thing, just enough. Her voice telling him to get to the back where he belonged. The sound of his bag hitting the floor. Crack of the slap. The crack of the slap, then the silence that followed. That silence was the part people couldn't stop talking about. Within 12 hours, the embedded clip had 6 million views. Within 24, 11 million. By the end of the second day, it crossed 14 million and kept climbing. The story didn't just trend, it detonated. Cable news ran segments. Morning shows played the clip on loop. Podcasters broke it down frame by frame. The public reaction was overwhelming and almost entirely one-sided. Because the recording left no room for debate, there was no ambiguity, no both sides argument to be made. Just a woman spitting contempt at a man over the color of his skin, and then striking him when he wouldn't submit to her. 3 weeks after Sandra's article ran, the county district attorney filed formal criminal charges against Deborah Voss. Count 1, simple assault, based on the recorded slap and corroborated by both Natalie Sharp's sworn statement and Officer Callahan's incident report. Count 2, filing a false report, based on the recorded intercom call where Deborah claimed Elias had grabbed her arm and become physically aggressive, a claim directly contradicted by every second of footage and every witness on that plane. Her attorney pushed for a plea deal, reduced charges, no jail time, community service only. The district attorney, facing intense public scrutiny and sitting on a case built on airtight evidence, offered nothing favorable. It went to trial. It lasted 3 days and could have lasted 3 hours. The prosecution played the full recording for the jury, unedited, all 40 minutes and 31 seconds of it, projected in a courtroom so quiet you could hear the air conditioning cycle. Natalie Sharp took the stand, hands gripping the edge of the witness box, voice steady and unshaken through every question. Captain Holloway provided a written statement confirming that Deborah's term manifest review entirely a direct violation of standard procedure. Then Deborah took the stand herself. Her attorney had coached her stay calm, stay sympathetic, show remorse. It lasted about 4 minutes before the prosecutor asked one question that broke the whole performance apart. Lately, Miss Voss, can you explain to this courtroom why you assume Mr. Marsh did not belong in the owner's suite of his own aircraft? Lately, she opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He didn't look like, he wasn't dressed like someone who would. She stopped there. Lately, she never finished the sentence. She didn't have to. 12 jurors, a packed gallery, and a judge who'd seen 100 trials all heard exactly what she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. Lately, the jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. Guilty on both counts. 18 months, 2 months probation, of community at a right to civil education center, a $15,000 fine, and a permanent record that would follow her through every background check for the rest of her working life. Lately, she stood in that courtroom as the verdict came down and didn't cry, didn't react at all, just stood there, stiff and hollow, staring at nothing, like a woman watching the last door in the building swing shut. Lately, the fallout for Sterling was just as brutal. Lately, the third-party audit wrapped 8 weeks after the incident, and the results were damning: a systemic pattern of ignored complaints from Black and Latino clients, inadequate training, no real accountability structure, and a culture of silence that middle managers like Gerald Finch had rubber stamped for years. Lately, 3 additional employees were let go once the audit results came in. Nathaniel Briggs, facing pressure from the board and a near revolt among shareholders, stepped down as CEO 14 months after the incident, citing personal reasons nobody believed for a second. Lately, but something else happened in all this that mattered more than any lawsuit or verdict. Elias Marsh, a man who spent his whole life avoiding the spotlight, stepped into it quietly, deliberately, and entirely on his own terms. Lately, he set up the Marsh Dignity Fund, $10 million set aside to provide free legal representation for people facing discrimination in hospitality, aviation, and retail, people who didn't have a recording, people who didn't own the plane, people whose stories usually just disappeared into a complaint file, stamped "no further action required." Lately, in its first year alone, the fund took on 81 cases. 14 ended in settlements, 5 went to trial. Lately, all 5 were won. So where is everybody now? Elias closed the Austin acquisition without a single complication. Marsh Horizon Group expanded into 5 new markets over the following year, crossing $5 billion in revenue for the first time in company history. Lately. But Elias didn't change, not really. He still flies private. He still wears the same worn hoodies. He still walks through terminals alone. No entourage, no fanfare. Lately. And yes, he still records. Every interaction, every time something feels off, his phone is ready before his mouth even opens. Because Elias learned a long time ago that in a world that judges you on sight, proof isn't optional. Lately. It's survival. He gave exactly 1 interview after the trial, a short conversation with Sandra Cole. She asked him what he wanted people to take away from all of it. Lately, "I don't need anyone to remember my name," he told her. "I want them to remember how close this came to never seeing daylight at all." Lately, "If I hadn't pressed record that morning, it would have just been her word against mine, and we both know how that usually goes." Lately, Deborah Voss completed every hour of her probation and community service. But the consequences didn't stop when the courtroom doors closed behind her. Lately, she applied to 4 airlines. All 4 turned her down. 3 hospitality companies. Same result everywhere she turned. Lately, her name had quietly become the case, as passed around in HR trainings across the industry, not as a villain in somebody's story, but as a lesson in exactly what happens when bias goes unchecked long enough, and accountability finally shows up anyway. Lately, a local reporter tracked her down 8 months later, working retail in a small town 2 states over. She declined to comment. Lately, he described her in his final paragraph as a woman living quietly in the shadow of a single morning she couldn't take back. Lately, Natalie Sharp never went back to Sterling. She didn't have to. The charter company that took over Elias's fleet offered her a position as senior flight attendant, a title that would have taken her 5 more years to earn where she came from. Lightly. She accepted the same day the offer landed. Asked later why she'd spoken up that morning, knowing exactly what it could cost her, she said, because I saw the whole thing happen, and staying quiet would have made me part of it. Lightly. I couldn't live with that. Then she added, silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. And that morning, I decided I wasn't going to make that choice anymore. Lightly. Sterling Aviation Partners survived, technically, but it was never the same company again. It lost 2 more major clients in the months that followed. Lightly. Its stock took 11 months to climb back to where it had been before the story broke. What Nathaniel Briggs had spent 2 decades building wasn't scarred by the slap itself. Lightly. It was scarred by every complaint that came before it, filed and closed and forgotten, that made the slap feel inevitable in hindsight. Lightly. The Marsh Dignity Fund kept growing. By the end of its second year, it had funded legal representation for more than 150 documented discrimination cases across 11 states, and it had partnered with 2 universities to build bias awareness training for the hospitality and aviation industries. Lately, Elias reviewed every quarterly report personally. He never called a press conference about it, never looked for credit. He just kept building the same way he always had, quietly, deliberately, without needing anyone to clap. Lately, look, the story you just heard, the names, the specific flight, all of that is fiction, built to carry a truth that's a lot more common than most of us want to admit. Lately. But that feeling being judged before you've said a single word, being treated like a problem just for existing in a space somebody decided wasn't yours, that part is real, and it happens more than any of us like to think about. Lately. Most of the time there's no camera rolling. Most of the time there's no lawyer on speed dial and no third-party audit waiting in the wings. Lately. Most of the time it's just somebody's word against somebody else's, and we already know how that usually goes. If this story made you feel something, that feeling is the whole point. Lightly. Hold on to it a little longer than you normally would. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. Lightly. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Lightly. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. Lightly. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.